Good morning, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. We are allowing those who are joining us right now, members of the press, to join us and to kind of get settled as we're getting ready to kick off today's People's Budget and the press conference here today. So just going to wait just a few moments to allow folks to get settled, and then we will begin. We just want to say good morning to everyone who is watching us, even in the Zoom, and those who are on Facebook Live today. Looking forward to the discussion and the words that are going to be shared in light of today's events and the focus for today as well. So just giving a few moments to allow folks to get settled, and then we shall begin. Thankful to see a number of folks already joining with us: Sean Walsh, Ryan Briggs, NBC 10, as well as others. Welcoming you all today for what we have to share. And as you're rolling in, let us now begin. Members of the press and those watching at home by Facebook Live, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the People's Budget Response and Kickoff. My name is Nicholas O'Rourke. I am a director with the Pennsylvania Working Families Party, and I'm grateful to be emceeing today's presser. Last year, amidst a pandemic and uprising for racial justice, all our eyes were on the budget, if anyone can remember that. Budgets are fundamentally moral documents. Where we put our money does in fact matter. This year is also vital. We are watching white supremacy on trial in Minnesota. Let's count the roll here. We've lived through the brutal murder of Walter Wallace Jr. just 10 blocks from where I'm living and sitting right now. Philadelphians lost their lives to COVID, primarily in Black and brown neighborhoods. Thousands lost their jobs or had hours rolled back. We are truly experiencing an upsurge in violence and the devastating losses of too many young Black people. What happens this year matters. It matters because what the budget funds reflects exactly what lessons that our city takes away from the last year and all that it contained. Our organizations know what we need: fully funded neighborhoods that provide quality education, jobs, housing, libraries, and rec centers for all, paid for by the rich who can afford to pay. We've said it before, we'll continue to say it again. And let's be clear, this budget barely gets us back to pre-pandemic status quo. That was already an austerity budget. It seems that the mayor's office has not learned vital lessons from the pandemic, that if we want a true recovery, especially for Black and brown Philadelphians who have suffered the most from the pandemic, we need massive, massive equitable investments in the neighborhoods hardest hit by the pandemic and hardest hit by decades of underinvestment and divestment. Our city has yet to recover from the 2008 recession. So moving back to budget numbers from after the recession is not a recovery. Not when the 2008 financial collapsed not so many Philadelphians off their feet. And they're still off their feet. The idea that we can try to balance our budget and gamble with our future revenue by cutting taxes is a backwards idea that only serves the political expediency of Mayor Kinney without considering the long-term future for Philadelphia. So today, we'll hear about what's at stake from the organizations leading work and have been leading work around a just recovery and an equitable budget for this year. We'll move through each speaker over the next course of an hour and ask members of the press to hold questions until the end today. So as you're listening, gather all your questions as you're hearing from our great speakers and hold those questions until all have finished speaking, and then we'll field questions at that point. We will also note that while the budget was just released, it is not the full budget yet. So we're aware of that. So we're still pushing for transparency so we can do a full analysis of the budget. So we just want to make that note before we begin with our speakers. Let me just call the roll for those that you're going to be hearing from today before we jump in and dive into those who are going to share. We are joined today by such persons as Chris Henderson, who is the executive director of Amistad Law Project, Evelyn Flint of DC 33, Local 696 and library worker, from the great Kendra Vanderwater and Presley of Yeah Philly down in Southwest doing really, really good work. Aubriana Morgan, Reclaim Philadelphia, the mass liberation organizer and a great leader in our city. Jose DeMarco of ACT UP, Chiquita Gaines, President of Home and School Council, Jamie Zigarelli of AFT Local 2026 and CCP faculty, Ahmad Mitchell of 1PA and a Coalition to Respect Every Worker, as well as the great Sam Rise of Artists Coalition for a Just Budget. And if we were in person, I would love for you guys to welcome them with a warm smile or a clapping of their hands, but you can probably do that with a thumbs up if you're watching by Zoom or something else that signifies that you're grateful to have them. That having been said, we don't want to waste any time. They have a lot to share. Let's bring up now our first speaker, Chris Henderson, Executive Director of Amistad Law Project. Chris?
Thank you, Nick. And thank you, press, for coming here today, and everyone else listening to this now. We demand no increase to the police budget. Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kinney is trying to pull the wool over our eyes. While the police budget line remains stagnant at over $700 million, we call attention to the shell game in which resources for police training and other so-called reforms are funneled through the managing director's office. Resources that end up in the hands of police are police funding. A powerful and growing movement is calling on Philly to reduce the bloated police budget. That is the only reason that Mayor Kinney is hiding funding for the police in the managing director's office. It's time to reduce the police budget. We call on the city of Philadelphia to ensure that the Philly police budget does not increase, and that means that both the police budget and any other resources for police must cumulatively add up to less than the approved police budget last year. When your loved one is having a mental health crisis, you should be able to call 911 and get that person the help they need without a cop showing up, because Philadelphians deserve treatment, not trauma. We fully reject the co-responder model the city continues to fund. This model pairs a mental health professional with an armed police officer to respond to mental health emergencies. All of the funding currently earmarked for the co-responder program, $6 million, should instead be put into expanding mobile crisis response units, and it should be those units alone that are dispatched by 911 to people experiencing a mental health crisis. The tragic murder of Walter Wallace Jr. last year reminds us that our communities need care, not the threat of violence. If we need even more resources for this program, our city has them. We must reject the tax cuts being put forward by the Kennedy administration and fund our city and our people. The modest investment in the mobile crisis units is not enough, especially when you have to remember and call a separate number to access those services. I'm hearing my sound is cutting in and out. Is that what other people are hearing as well? Is it good, Nick, or?
It's a little it's fading in and out. I'm sure that if I'm having trouble hearing, others are as well. Do the best you can.
Okay. Yeah. We can have something better now. We demand the city expand mobile crisis units and route these calls through 911. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for sharing. Again, if you have questions based off of what you did not hear or what you did hear, we ask you that you hold them until the end, and we're sure that someone will be able to tend to you at that time. So thank you, Chris. We want to now shift gears and go ahead and hear from our next speaker and our guest. I do want to make a note that I did lift up the fact that there would be a Jose DeMarco who would be sharing today from ACT UP. Unfortunately, they are unable to be here with us, but we do have in their stead a Jamal Henderson. So we're going to hear from Jamal as opposed to Jose DeMarco at the time that we bring up the speaker for ACT UP. But we will get there at a later point. That having been said, let's bring up Evelyn Flint from DC 33, Local 696, who's a library worker and a member of AFSCME Unity. Evelyn.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Evelyn Flint, a library worker and rank and file member of the union. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of AFSCME Unity. We are a rank and file caucus for city workers and AFSCME members who want to fight for stronger city services and a city budget that meets the needs of working class Philadelphians, not big businesses, together. At huge risk to ourselves and our families, city workers have been working tirelessly through the pandemic on the front lines, making sure residents have their trash picked up, running access centers for students, fixing streets, and keeping health centers running. We don't know how many city workers have contracted coronavirus, but we have heard of at least hundreds of cases. The city budget has been inadequate for years. Our schools, our libraries, and our parks are understaffed and underfunded. Many essential city departments like sanitation are so understaffed that they need a constant stream of overtime just to get the work done. We want to be clear, the mayor's proposal leaves last year's dramatic pandemic cuts in place. 2020's pandemic cuts have devastated public services. Well, city residents need city services more than ever to get back on their feet right now. At the Free Library, the mayor's budget leaves $3.6 million of cuts in place from before the pandemic, and it does not restore the full 6-day-a-week service. At Parks and Rec, the mayor's budget cuts $2.9 million from pre-pandemic levels. Even before the pandemic, many rec centers are physically unsafe and staffed by just one person. In the Streets Department, where sanitation workers worked around the clock and contracted COVID at alarming rates, Mayor Kenney cut the budget $11.3 million. This year's safety concerns and trash delays could continue. What have cuts looked like on the ground? Last summer, 454 workers across the city were laid off. Most of them were women. Most of them were people of color. Most were the lowest paid temporary workers who get let go and rehired every year. They never have union representation, health insurance, or a permanent year-round job. We know the city can absolutely afford to fully fund crucial city services to make sure we have safe buildings, clean streets, fully staffed libraries, well-maintained parks and rec centers, engaging after-school programs, robust public health, and housing services. The layoffs were unnecessary and harmful, and those workers must be rehired to permanent positions as city services are rebuilt. The budget should not be balanced on the back of these working class families, so we are also happy to see the wage tax reduced. But without increasing revenue from other sources, this budget proposal simply postpones an inevitable budget gap and the layoffs and service cuts that will come with it. We are disappointed that the proposal relies almost completely on federal stimulus funding. We believe that now is the time to proactively plan for a fiscally responsible future. But how? Mayor Kenney said in his address today that we can't tax the rich, but we know that isn't true. We can tax the ultra-rich and require large corporations and even nonprofits to pay their fair share. Yes, we can do this, even with the Pennsylvania uniformity clause. Even during the pandemic, large corporations have made massive profits, like Comcast, $10.5 billion in 2020 alone. We need a big business tax on these large corporations that pay a tax rate of less than 1% right now. We need to make large nonprofits like UPenn, Drexel, and Jefferson also pay a fair rate on their huge endowment returns and billion-dollar real estate holdings. We need to tax the massive wealth of local billionaires and CEOs, like Brandywine CEO Jerry Sweeney, by levying estate taxes on the ultra-wealthy and taxing capital gains like the $1 million investment winnings. And we must also redirect funds away from the police department towards city departments that promote public safety and welfare. Last summer, the police shot and killed Walter Wallace Jr., a young Black man who was having a mental health crisis. And just a few days ago, they shot and killed a young man named James Alexander during a traffic stop in Logan. Why are we giving the police department over $700 million a year to kill Black men in our city? The police department's budget would serve our city much better if it went towards public health, infrastructure, homelessness services, and schools, instead of things like taxpayer-funded $1 million settlements. We call on the mayor and city council to create a budget that works for all Philadelphians by taxing the extreme wealth that exists in Philadelphia and investing it in our community. AFSCME Unity is honored to stand in solidarity with other union members, city residents, and progressive community organizations fighting for the city budget that we all deserve and that you all deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you. A number of things lifted up that were super powerful for us to know. It is true and should resonate with all who are listening right now, that those laid off the most have been, per the usual, women and people of color. We must pay attention to this as a pattern that we see. And then we must absolutely tax the rich. And this is absolutely essential if we are going to bring about a more just city where all of us can thrive. To see taxing the rich and corporations as something that is an attack on affluence or something along those lines is to see themselves outside of the common good and well-being of the many. In preference of the 1%. We have to shift our thinking. We have to prioritize those who are most impacted and Evelyn has already lifted up for us the stark realities of this moment. Let's shift gears now and hear from someone who's doing fabulous work in Southwest. If you have not been paying attention, you must be living under a rock. This is a real changer that is doing real impactful work in Southwest Philadelphia. Let's receive Kendra Vanderwater, who is part of Yeah Philly, one of the founders of such, as well as a young person with her. Kendra, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Presley. I'm actually texting Miss Kendra right now. She is having internet issues, so I'm going to be speaking for her.
That'll work. We'd love to hear it. Take it away.
Okay, so we are Yeah Philly. We were based in Southwest, but now we're just in West Philadelphia on 53rd and Walton. We do a lot of community service, and we work with a lot of like teenagers, as like myself, that's been either in gun violence or kind of like trouble. I guess like other people will call them like troubled teens. But when teenagers come to Yeah Philly, we don't like to judge anybody. We just simply like to give everybody a fair chance. And believe it or not, before we got a lot of funding, Miss Kendra and Mr. James, which is the other co-founder of Yeah Philly, actually were paying out of pocket for everything that we had. So it kind of was like, when they didn't have the funding, we only could just meet up at rec centers, and we could only meet up at rec centers and maybe stay with them for like an hour or two. But I guess once we got some funding, we started to branch out and go into giving out food, dog food, produce all over Philly, and basically like help out as much as we could. And so, like with that being said, it was kind of hard because we couldn't give it out. Like we couldn't give out as much as we wanted to, and we couldn't like do as much as we wanted to because we were low on funds. So.
Thank you, Presley. Thank you very much for your offering. Just want to state and just shine light for those that are listening to see the good work that is being done. As is often said in organizing activist spaces, for those that are looking to address problems that we see, that the people who are closest to the pain or the problem are also the ones that are closest to the solution. As you see, that even when Kendra is unable to be present due to tech difficulties, which a number of us have experienced over the last year, I'm sure, a young person, those who have been directly impacted in the form of Presley can come and to speak to what is needed in our communities. And so thankful for you, Presley, for lifting up that insight. It is important. It's also important to hear it from you. Let's press on. Maybe later we can have Kendra speak if she's able to get back on, and then maybe there might be some questions for her at that time. But let's continue on with our agenda. Next up, we have one of the great leaders in our community that is helping to organize and really help educate and get folks on one accord as it relates to mass liberation and how we need in all areas of the work that we do. Let's receive Aubriana Morgan, mass liberation organizer for Reclaim Philadelphia.
Thank you so much. But I do see James, co-founder of Yeah Philly, who just joined. So James, if you feel ready, I invite you to maybe speak because Kendra had to hop off with having some tech difficulties. So I would want you to just add on to what Presley said about the work that y'all are doing and what you want this budget to be.
Yes, can you all hear me? Yeah, again, Kendra was having some technical difficulties, and I'm glad Presley was able to kind of step in, and speak on behalf of our organization. So again, we started our organization because we do believe that, the last resort to, any intervention is the police. We believe that if we continue to invest in our communities, because we know what the need really looks like, what it feels like, that we can handle that burden, because we're all in this together. And one of the things Presley was mentioning was, me and Kindred has been passionate about supporting young people from day one. And again, at in the earlier days, like we had to do things out of our pocket, because this is what we believed in. We believed in it so much that we resigned from our own individual jobs to specifically focus on this type of work. And we kind of transitioned into like just focusing on young people who are impacted by the justice system. And in many ways, they're still being it's still unfair to them, because they're just stuck in this cycle that we want to invest in so much money in the court systems, but that same money can do just as much in our communities to prevent a lot of things that's been happening. So we do a lot of focus on conflict resolution and now anger management, because that's what our community needs. That's what our community said that a lot of the issues stem from. A lot of our young people, because of their early interactions with police, they're often still triggered by it. So, we know that we have to, allow them to lead us in the path that we need to go in. So we do a lot of work with that population of young people, and they're the brightest, they're the smartest, and a lot of what we need to do is invest in that type of interventions. So just individuals like Presley, and so many other young people in West and Southwest, we always try to give kudos to them, because when we invest in them, the outcomes look very different. And that's what we want the city to understand, is that when we invest in our people, our young people, and these efforts, the outcomes are extremely different. And as we can see now, like, that's not what's happening. And we see the outcome, and it's the opposite of what they're preaching. The violence is increased, and it's not more law enforcement that's needed. It's not more money shifted to their budget for their agenda. It's not expanding the same services that they already have that don't work, and it's proven that it doesn't work. It's investing into things that we identify that works, and that's why I'm glad we're part of this meeting. We're part of this, echoing the same things, and we're going to continue to be united and hope that a lot of the funds that do get allocated, we're able to be impacted. We're able to have the impact on how that stuff is distributed. So thank you all for having us on. And again, I do have to be brief. I was in a separate meeting at the same time, but I wanted to kind of step in and help Presley out. But definitely we all support one another. And I think that the agenda is something that we need to collectively create and make sure that, the city takes, heed to what we believe works.
Thank you, James. Thank you for what you've shared. Thank you for what you've offered. It's all absolutely important. I just want to give a shout out to the fact that they're doing the work, even without the funding so far, and could do so much more if they had it. Congratulations on the new property purchase, and providing actual physical material space for folks to do the work that is necessary to help create safer communities that we can feel. Let's pass it back to Aubriana Morgan from Reclaim Philadelphia. Aubriana?
Thank you, Nick. And thank you to all the leaders in the space with me and everyone tuning in on Facebook. Again, my name is Aubriana Morgan, Mass Liberation Organizer with Reclaim Philadelphia. I live in Haddington, right down the block from Shepherd Rec Center. My neighborhood is similar to others across the city, mostly Black, working class, and poor folks, doing what we can to keep the bills paid and enjoy life, all while facing the constant fear of violence. Not just violence in our homes and on the streets, but violence from the police and inside the jails. All of us want to live in a safe and thriving community, but that is out of reach when you're poor and Black and struggling through the trauma that comes with being poor and Black. For too long, city leadership has operated in a scarcity mindset, claiming that there's not enough money to invest in the programs and services that our communities need and deserve. The money is there, but it's being poured into the carceral system to surveil, harass, arrest, and cage Black and brown folks, and drug users, and sex workers, and unhoused people. There's also money being hoarded by major corporations and nonprofits who don't pay their fair share of taxes to the city they occupy. Our communities are in crisis because of decades of divestment. COVID-19 and the gun violence crisis have only sharpened this reality for more people, but the symptoms were already there. The only way we can interrupt cycles of poverty and violence is to commit to long-term investments in the communities that have been neglected for far too long. This isn't just about the next fiscal year. We're calling on Mayor Kenney and City Council to commit to 10 years of investments at the minimum. What we need for a healthy Philadelphia is where communities are safe because of an abundance of resources. We want to see at least 10 million a year towards housing. This includes funding to preserve existing PHA housing without displacement, expansion of the basic systems repair program to support homeowners with essential repairs, a fully funded eviction diversion program, fully funded affordable housing trust fund, the land bank, and Office of Homeless Services, with some changes in transparency to the Office of Homeless Services and the other programs, right? We want to see at least $100 million per year towards gun violence prevention. This includes investments in our rec centers and libraries. It's especially important to prioritize the ones in neighborhoods hardest hit by gun violence. So community members, young people in particular, have a space to go to engage in healthy activities, to stay cool in the summer, to access the internet, to learn and get connected to important resources. And that money must be used to increase staffing levels at these rec centers and libraries. We want to see investments in reentry services. So people coming home from prisons, jails, detention centers get the support that they need to find stability after being separated from their family and their community. And this is a necessary component of reducing violence and recidivism. We want to see investments in the community organizations that are doing the work, like Yeah Philly, like Ceasefire, like Amir's Healing Studio, right? While the Office of Violence Prevention tries to offer small grants to community organizations, it's not enough for them to create sustainable programming that supports our communities. So instead of city-run programs getting the bulk of the resources, we need to see investments in community-based organizations that are making important interventions that allow our community members to heal and feel more safe. We want to see at least $50 million per year towards healthcare. This means investing in community-based behavioral health and mental health services so that we can respond with care in crisis and also provide long-term healthcare that leads to real healing. We should no longer expect these community-based organizations to rely on private funding because it will never be enough to respond to the growing and urgent need across the city. There are other programs and services our communities need that I do not have time to name right now, but I do want to uplift one very important thing. The police do not keep us safe. They do not prevent violence from happening, and they do not support survivors of violence. For too long, the carceral system has perpetuated conditions of class domination, racism, gender oppression, and poverty. If we as a society chose to invest in our people and communities, there would no longer be a need for police and prisons. What's included in our city's budget is a reflection of our values. So it's time for the mayor and city council to stand with our communities and pass a budget that values every life in the city and gives all of us the resources and care we need to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Abriana. Thank you for what you shared. Thank you for the truth that you have told today. And we hope again that everyone is getting a chance to hear it and understand. Beyond the debates, beyond the opinions and the social media bantering, the reality is there are folks who are living in cities that are over-policed and not safe at all, who are still waking up concerned about their livelihood. And the reality is we must get beyond the safety that we can see or that we've been trained or conditioned and socialized to think that we see, and allow it to meet up with the actual safety that we need, that we can feel. So that requires making sure that we're investing in all the things that Abriana has lifted up, and all the things that Kendra and James and Presley, Evelyn and Chris have all lifted up already. But that's not it. We have others who have something to say on this topic. And so let's go ahead and shift now onto Jamal Henderson, who is going to speak now from ACT UP. Jamal, share with us if you will.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jamal Henderson. I'm a member of ACT UP Philadelphia. We are the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. So one of the lessons that ACT UP's learned throughout the history of the AIDS crisis is that often what makes us sick and kills us isn't the diseases, but the government neglect, government choices, and even government violence. That's why ACT UP is supporting the people's budget. Mayor Kinney and City Council have choices. They can choose to invest in state violence and a police force that hasn't made us safer, which has sent Homeland Security to ACT UP members' houses over flower deliveries, tear gassed us, beat protesters, killed Walter Wallace and James Alexander, or they can choose to invest in community safety and health. They're going to need money, and they're going to spend the money either way. So they can balance the budget on the backs of poor people through service cuts and soda taxes, or they can tax the rich and divest from violence and invest in communities. As an HIV positive person, I know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I take one pill a day for my HIV, and that pill costs around $2,500 a month. That's more than twice what my rent is. Philadelphia could spend more for affordable housing for someone who's trading sex. Philadelphia could spend money on affordable housing for somebody who's trading sex now, or they could choose to pay more later when that person needs HIV medication or they're possibly hospitalized with pneumonia or thrush. Last summer, unhoused Philadelphians spoke up en masse through the protest encampments around the city. They negotiated with the city and won commitments for the city to save 50 houses from gentrifiers and to turn them over to us to fix and use for free or affordable housing. And when I say us, I don't mean ACT UP. I mean the organizers of the encampments. I'm sorry. We also won a commitment for tiny housing, which were supposed to be real tiny houses with running water, kitchens, electricity, to provide shelter and safe and dignified hotels through the end of the COVID pandemic. The city broke all of these promises, turning down federal funding to keep the COVID hotels open, violently displacing people on Christmas Eve, even using large displays of police violence, a police force to enact evictments to evict encampments around the city just in the last few weeks. Refusing to provide even 50 viable homes while continuing to condemn homes to sell to for-profit developers, swapping out real tiny homes with sheds with no running water parked on an old jail site. It's not a matter of not having the money. The city is turning down federal funding and choosing to invest in expanding policing needed to constantly harass homeless people who aren't being served by the city. Right now, we are reaping what we have sown. And with massive displacement leading to anger, despair, and violence, it looks like Mayor Kinney wants to treat the problem by doubling down on gentrification, displacement, and violence. We are asking City Council to put us on a better course, and where we care for each other, provide solutions, not through force and coercion, but with love and hope. We can do that by investing in housing, healthcare, and community violence paid for by fair taxes on those entities extracting the value of our hard work and turning it over to shareholder profits and divesting from over-policing, over-incarcerating, and the racist systems of control. Thank you.
Love and hope, Jamal teaches us, looks like, not just sounds like, but looks like investment in healthcare. It looks like investment in housing. It looks like divestment from over-policing and other pathways to police. Are we hearing loud and clear that those who are here are concerned with the well-being of the majority experience of those that live in the city of Philadelphia and wherever they may make their house? I've heard mentioning of encampments and desires to run them away as opposed to wrestling, as these folks are today, with ways that we can actually resolve a problem and help provide a sustainable and a thriving life for them. I hope that others can join with this kind of thinking ongoing and within an ongoing basis. Let's shift gears. Shakita Gaines is the president of Philadelphia's Home and School Council, somebody I consider a dear sister, a great leader in our city, and somebody who has a lot to say. Let's go ahead and hear from Shakita Gaines. Shakita?
Hi, guys. My name is Shakita Gaines. I am the Philadelphia Home and School Council president. Our organization is parent-led, and we are all volunteers. We do not receive funding from the city, and we have to take most of our money from donations or try to apply for grants that we typically do not qualify for. So I am here today to talk about real investments and the transformation of our schools. On March 13, 2020, school buildings across the city were closed. But many of our schools have faced closure last year before COVID-19 because of issues of asbestos, lead, and mold. In the midst of a health crisis, on top of the one we were already facing, it is well past time for the school district of Philadelphia and the Board of Education to clean up our schools. The mental health impacts of last year must be the central focus as well. We need trauma-informed care and qualified professionals who can offer mental health support to young people and their families, especially after the devastation that COVID-19 has caused and the loss of so many people due to gun violence and the unaddressed mental issues in Philadelphia. As we see more money coming into our schools, the public must be part of deciding on the district spending. There have been many missteps for generations by the school district leadership. As we have learned, no investments will be successful if they do not include families in decision-making, who are the true leadership of our schools. And yet the Board of Education is silencing us through changes to the speaker policy, the main tool for accountability to school families. In the next couple of minutes, you'll see a petition in the chat. Please sign that. This rush to open up schools feels like a priority on high-stake testings. And PHSC and Parents United is demanding that parents and caregivers opt out and refuse to test. Our children are more than a test score and financial gain for test makers. As members of our City, Our School Coalition, Philadelphia Home and School Council has been working alongside students, educators, other parent organizations, and community members to come to a collective vision for our school. Other members' organizations are leading campaigns for the following divestments for policies and practices that harm and investments in policies and practice that transform. 1, police-free schools. 2, sanctuary schools. 3, investment for internet access for all children. 4, required anti-racist training for all staff. 5, culturally and politically responsive curriculum. And lastly, a halt to charter expansions. Please follow Philadelphia Home and School Council, our City, Our Schools, our members across Ed Justice movements in Philly for our calls to action around the school budget. We thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to working with you all in the future.
Thank you, Shakita, for all that you have shared. Just so important to hear from those who are doing the work around education, the need to prioritize actively being anti-racist and actively training those who are engaging with majority Black and brown students to also undergo anti-racism training, particularly in a time right now where there are those forces that we live next to and live with that are committed to obfuscating the realities of racism in our country, in our Commonwealth, and in our city. And so important amongst all those things to make sure that we are prioritizing this in a place like Philadelphia. Thank you, Shakita, for everything you lifted up. Looking forward to any questions that folks may have for her and others when we arrive to our question answer section. Let's move now to Jamie Zigarelli, who is a AFT Local 2026 representative and is a part of CCP's faculty. Jamie, take it away.
Thank you, Nicholas. So my name's Jamie Zigarelli. I'm a faculty member at Community College of Philadelphia. I'm also the treasurer of Local AFT 2026. We're a union of 1,000 faculty and staff. We fight for truly affordable and accessible public higher education in Philadelphia. We serve over 20,000 students every year. 65% of those students are women, 70% of those students are people of color. Community colleges in in Pennsylvania are supposed to be funded 1/3 by the state, 1/3 by the city, and 1/3 by student tuition. At Community College of Philadelphia, our students are funding 50% of the operating budget, and it's been as high as 60% in the years after the Great Recession. Mayor Kenny's proposed budget doesn't change that fundamental fact. We have to stop replacing government spending with student lending. When the government's not fairly spending money on CCP and on public K through 12 education in Philadelphia, they're forcing folks with no generational wealth, who are largely people of color, to take out loans to fund their education. Mayor Kenny's budget speech is going to tout that that he's going to fund about 5,000 Cato scholars who'd be helped over the next 5 years. But in 2018 and 2019, we had over 5,000 students who took out $23 million in student loans. And that's the same amount that the city and state came up short in their 2/3 obligation to fund the college. Each year at Community College of Philadelphia, we hand out about 2,000 degrees, but we also have over 1,000 students who default on those student loans. Student loan debt, a lot of people don't know, is disproportionately held by women, and it's disproportionately held by Black women. That's the invisible cost of Mayor Kenny's budget. A people's budget would almost completely end this, and that's what a commitment to anti-racism would look like. In Mayor Kenny's 5-year plan, it doesn't appear, it appears that all the new money is going to be earmarked for the Cato Scholarship at Community College of Philadelphia. That doesn't help 95% of our students. Cato Scholarship for the few, it's not enough. It creates new inequities. We need basically Cato Scholarship for all. In the 15 largest cities in the country, 40% of residents have associate's degrees. In Philadelphia, 30% of residents have associate's degrees. A lot more investment in education from kindergarten right through community college will fix this. All of the research on higher ed spending shows that the best way to improve persistence and graduation rates is to provide more money. And fair funding would improve every aspect of the education our students receive, basically from registration through graduation. We have only 11 full-time academic advisors for 20,000 students. It would take them over a year to talk to every student just once. So for our students, a lot of the battle happens outside of the classroom, and that's another reason that we need progressive revenue. A public bank would finance low-income housing, environmental protection, small business development, and all of that is going to help our students. A public bank would also finance the School District of Philadelphia. It would provide credit access to folks who have been historically discriminated against in credit markets. And the earnings from a public bank would fund priorities for communities of color. 12 council members have already signed on to a bill that's calling for a public bank. A number of community groups have also joined this call. And that's why I'm for taxing the rich. It's the historical norm in times of greater equality. Full funding would help faculty and staff at Community College of Philadelphia to provide truly affordable and accessible public higher education. It's what we need if we want a fair and equitable Philadelphia and a college that's fundamentally anti-racist. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. It is the historical norm for us to tax the rich. It is important. Again, it's not an attack. It's about focusing on the common good. What is going to help our communities thrive? Not for the 1%, but for the 99. So thankful for what you offered. We're going to move now into our last two speakers before our question and answer section. We're going to hear from Ahmad Mitchell of 1PA, who is and also a coalition to respect every worker, is part of that as well as from Sam Rise of Artist Coalition for a Just Budget. We're going to have them come in that order. I'm going to leave you at this point, and we will have the remainder of this section, as well as our questions, handled by a great leader in our city, Deb Rose, who will handle any questions that you have and bring you to the conclusion of this press conference. Thank you all for being here today. Let's hear from Ahmad Mitchell. Ahmad?
Thank you for your introduction, Nick. Hello, everybody. My name is Ahmad Mitchell. I'm a worker leader with 1PA and a member of the Coalition to Respect Every Worker. I'm also a student at the Community College of Philadelphia, where I just won an election for president of the Student Government Association. I've worked at a number of restaurants before the pandemic and during the pandemic, where I've seen firsthand how employers take advantage of workers. We have the Office of Worker Protections in place to support Philly workers, but like so many other offices in the city, they are underfunded and lack the capacity to create enough tangible change. Bad actor businesses know this, and there are continuing unjust practices, and workers are suffering. We demand that the Office of Worker Protections is fully funded to properly protect workers, investigate workplaces, and if necessary, prosecute workplaces that take advantage of workers. This investment in Philadelphia workers will pay dividends. A study by the Economic Policy Institute described that out of $50 billion low-wage workers lost to wage theft, $2 billion was recovered in the years 2015 to 2016. This loss of wealth for primarily Black and brown workers further exacerbates issues like gun violence, homelessness, opportunities for higher education, and other opportunities for social mobility. Progressive pro-worker legislation has been passed, but it will not become a reality for Philadelphians if it is not properly enforced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. And that's a common theme across a lot of what's been said today. We need to protect and support all workers. And I want to uplift the need to especially include undocumented workers in that, sex workers in that. So thank you for uplifting that, Ahmad. Next, I want to pass the mic over to Sam Rise, who is joining us on behalf of Artists for Just Philadelphia.
Thanks so much for having me, everybody. And just feel like it's really important in this moment to recognize that I'm a non-native Philadelphian. And like so many other non-native Philadelphians who want to call the city home, who want to naturalize ourselves in Philadelphia, it's our responsibility to amplify the voices and the calls of people who were born and raised in Philadelphia, the folks who make our city so extraordinary and so great. And those calls right now are for just funding, for equitable funding, and to resource the folks who have always protected and supported Philadelphia communities. Our contributions to this fight are not gifts or generosity, they're just what's owed. Feels like our responsibility to turn our volume up. And for me specifically, to advocate for artists in this city who have been drowned out for too long by outside interests. I'm here to read some statements and share some insights from local community members who deserve to be heard. And I really want to uplift the solutionary nature of all the art makers, educators, advocates, and disruptors in the city who make it so vital and so vibrant. Shout outs also to the work that's been done by the Arts and Culture Task Force and the myriad organizers mobilizing as we speak to bring arts back into the forefront of our city. There are so many voices and faces that should be on this call, but they're elbows deep in the work right now, literally pivoting to provide essential services and supports to folks in this community and beyond it. And so it's not enough to resource large institutions to disseminate the money or resources that they see fit, but we need to make our city friendly for individual artists and for small community organizations that are community born, bred, and led to thrive and have the resources that they need to keep our city the extraordinary place that we know it is. So I don't know, I think there was some spin in Mayor Kinney's budget that arts are actually being restored, that the PCF is getting an additional $1 million this year in the budget. And the reality is that the Philadelphia Cultural Fund has been operating at a deficit for years. And it's still, even with that restoration, like so many other restorations to the budget for essential work, it's operating at 33% less than what it actually needs to survive. As Nick mentioned, and so many other organizers on this call have mentioned, the resources that we need have long been absent from the budget. And so the only path forward is to start over tabula rasa and install the people's budget in the place where Kenny's budget draft is right now. Speaking specifically to artists and art, we're everywhere. And what the city's leadership continuously fails to recognize is that arts and culture isn't an abstract sector that's meaningless or that's cute that we can accommodate in lush times. We're vital, living, breathing communities. We're present in all of the aspects of the city's makeup. We're predominantly Black, brown, Indigenous, people of color, queer and trans identified folks. And there's so much when we think about arts and culture that defines every single aspect of the city's infrastructure. We're not a sector that can be siloed. We're represented in every sector in the city, and we're going to be one of the essential tools to move us through an unprecedented time. And as we talk about solutions for violence prevention, for imagining new ways forward, for prefiguring the city that we want, know that arts and culture have to be installed in every sector of the work that we do to move us forward. And know that if we are thinking about what we need to resource and equip our communities towards safety, towards care, that we should certainly, at the bare minimum, be prioritized over police. We need a budget that aligns itself, a city that aligns itself with its people, and the reality of the allocations that are present in this budget make it abundantly clear that the only ally that the city and the city managing director's office are interested in are the allyship of the Philadelphia Police Department. Our greatest cultural assets are leaving the city, and that's something that feels really important to acknowledge as well. As articulated by the Arts and Culture Task Force, some of the greatest musicians, artists, and cultural creators of the world are from this community, but are being treated punitively. You know, the reality is that like continuing to contribute to the richness and the vitality of Philadelphia is increasingly more difficult because we're constantly being squeezed and pressed out. I just want to take an opportunity right now to read a statement from Jennifer Turnbull, who is a Philadelphia caregiver, homeowner, artist, arts administrator with Spiral Q. So this budget announcement makes clear that the perceived value of the PPD versus essential social services. If the PPD is tasked with servicing and protecting, they're not doing a good job, obviously. And it is irresponsible to keep funding that which has failed to lower crime rates despite increased investments during Kenny's time as mayor. It's time to invest in the things that we already know work. The research is clear, like mental health direct services that have an expanded crisis response unit. We already know that smaller grassroots arts and culture sector have pivoted to provide even more of those direct social services, in addition to direct arts programming that support mental health through art making and art expression. It's backwards to invest money in a system that does not function and expect that system to provide what already exists in an underfunded infrastructure: mental health services, interrupting domestic violence, food distribution, destigmatization, art making, and other work filled by mutual aid efforts. In any other circumstances, those who don't do a good job get fired, get less money, and lose contracts. Why is the PPD any different? We already know that grassroots arts and culture organizers are doing a better job at keeping people occupied, keeping people fed, keeping people housed and safe. So what's the problem? It's the overdependence on the police force to do everything that shouldn't be their purpose. Everyone is safer when they aren't overexhausted and can operate in their area of expertise. So we need to tax the rich. We need Penn and other large institutions to pay pilots to resource the communities that they're stealing from, that they're extracting from. This is me, by the way. And we need to defund the PPD. So on behalf of so many artists like me, in honor and in reverence to Philadelphia and its centuries of history of resilience, of strength, of solutionary energy, underground railroad resources to communities that deserve them, that are entitled to them, we are coming for what is owed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. And again, thank you to everyone who has been speaking today and putting out a very beautiful and bold vision for what this budget needs to look like. And what's really sitting with me right now is just everything that was said is just common sense. Talk to people, my neighbors, about this, and like everyone agrees that we need to be investing in all of the different things that were named by these incredible speakers. So for something that seems so basic and obvious, why aren't we able to do that? Why hasn't the budget looked the way we want it to look? And I think part of that is because there's money to be made from maintaining, the status quo, and money that is hoarded by a certain few individuals and corporations throughout the city. And so it is time to answer the calls of the people and pass a people's budget. So thank you all for tuning in. As Nick mentioned before he had to depart, we now want to hold space for some questions. There are members of the press who are in this space with us. So if you have specific questions, I ask that you type something in the chat, or you raise your hand with the Zoom feature so I can call on you to come off of mute and give your question. And then myself or any of the other leaders in this space can respond to the questions that you do have. Right now, I do want to acknowledge a question that did come through the Facebook Live. is there any provision in the people's budget to provide funding the entertainment venues that provide job opportunities and bring in revenue in Black and Brown communities? Specifically, the Dell and the Tower are examples. So I just want to name that the Philadelphia's People's Budget, this space, this campaign that we're engaging in, it's the culmination of all of the different organizations that had leaders here in this space with us, but also organizations that weren't here able to join us today, who have developed very robust and specific demands of what they want this city to look like. All of us agree to the top line demands that we cannot give any more money to the Philadelphia Police Department and should make a big effort to actually reduce police spending, to make changes to the FOP contract. They no longer have a stranglehold on our budget, right? Because that money is needed elsewhere in solutions that work, interventions that work, right? We also want to tax the rich. We agree that it doesn't make any sense that certain corporations and nonprofits are not paying their fair share to the city, and that money is owed to us. They should not be paying less than 1% of the taxes. They should be paying the full taxes to the city like any other community member and small business, right? We also agree that we need long-term investments in our community in order to create safe and thriving environments for us to grow and learn and feel connected and less exhausted and desperate, right? And then beyond that, different organizations have concrete things that they're asking for based on where their organizations operate and whose voices they're representing, right? So I wanted to field that question though to any of the other speakers. If you have thoughts about the entertainment venues and more funding for them, I feel like that's a question for Sam potentially, but I also saw you, Shakita, nodding your head. So if either of you wanted to come off mute and respond to the question. Shakita? No? Sam?
It can be me. Yeah. Just to underscore again and just remind folks that there are a ton of folks who have contributed an extraordinary amount of energy, labor, and solutionary efforting into creating a budget that works for us. And the reality of venues being left out of the mix, and also limited points of access for individual artists, gig workers, and creators in the city is something that's of paramount importance to everyone in this call, but especially all of us who are representing artists and creators in the city. So something that has been really important is one demand that we have is the bare minimum of 1% for the arts. 1% of the city's budget would be $60 million that could be allocated not just to organizations and in terms of grants, but that we could open that up to something other than public art and sculpture. Our venues need support. Individual artists need support. We need equitable payment for cultural contributors to the city that aren't institutions. And so infusing some resources into the city is absolutely essential. And also need to reserve additional funding for venues and for individual creators until this crisis is over, to be able to continuously shore up and infuse our cultural creators with the essential resources that they need. Is going to be paramount. So yeah, I think a lot of the time when we have these conversations, we focus on nonprofits and institutions, especially some of the larger ones. And the reality is that if we're talking about Mayor Kenny and so many others are so interested in business, but the reality is that local artists and local musicians are also local businesses. And so venues that support them need to be cared for in that way and prioritized in that way. And individual artists and musicians need to be prioritized in that way as well. So yeah, absolutely. Looking forward in the weeks to come to getting more and more information out to the community, because there are ways to bring more income into the city and there are ways to disseminate that more creatively to support individual Philadelphians. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you for your wisdom. And I see Shakita also has something to add.
So I'm going to add the fact that I am a Freedom Theater alumni. And without Freedom Theater, I probably would have perished in the streets. So when we start talking about gun violence and the need to help children and fill in their spaces, we always push out a basketball or football to urban children, but we never put in the arts where these children belong in. So spaces like, Freedom Theater, spaces that have schools that have dance and art and painting and all that, they give children the space, and even adults, the space to be who they're supposed to be. It's a mental health, it's emotional health, it's spiritual health, it's physical health. So we need to really put our money where our mouth is. And if we're talking about truly saving our children and saving our city, we definitely have to give back into that community. Again, Freedom alumni, love my babies. And yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, art definitely is a vehicle, a tool for healing that allows for healing, and also, allows young people and all people to step into some leadership, to see themselves as creative leaders, as, shepherding in creativity into their homes, their neighborhoods, their schools, their lives. And it's what you said was just definitely very beautiful. Sam, you wanted to do a quick response or add to what was said?
I just can't thank you enough, Chiquita, for naming that, and I'm so grateful for that. I what infuriates me about this conversation, especially considering the innumerable stories about people who have come up through Philadelphia being saved and supported by the arts, is that none of us have any reason to expect Mayor Kenny's office to prioritize the arts in this budget or protect people, which is infuriating. Because of the solutionary and visioning work that's possible through the arts. We just recognize that our work, arts organizations' work, is oriented around protecting and prioritizing communities, providing health, safety, education, social services that could spring up and really hold the community in the absence of funding to prisons and funding to police. So I just can't underscore the importance of that enough. And I know that other people on the call, Ms. Chiquita, as you were speaking, were snapping and clapping and just acknowledging the truth of that. So thank you for amplifying that.
Once again, I am just deeply appreciative of the leadership and wisdom and excellence that I have the honor to be in community with right now. And for those of us who are tuning in on Facebook right now, or maybe later in the day you'll watch the recording, I want you to know that this is just the beginning. Today marks the beginning of the budget season for fiscal year 2022. And so we had this event to just get you all excited and invigorated and aware of what is at stake through this budget decision that's going to be made in June. And so over the next couple weeks, there's going to be so many opportunities for you to show up with us, to stand with us, to flex power with us, people power with us, and make sure that we are taking your needs, your wants, your desires into city council budget hearings that are going to be coming up next month. Right? So when there is an opportunity for community members to make their voices heard in front of city council through the legislative process, we want to hear from you. So we're going to be circulating information about the dates and times for those hearings and how to sign up. If you've never given testimony in front of city council, we want to make sure that we're helping you through the process and that your stories are heard in front of city council and are used to, inform the budget decisions that they're going to make. So the fight is just beginning for this year. And so I appreciate all of you who are entering this journey, entering this struggle with us, because we'll only be successful if we do it together. Thank y'all so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day. I'm going to pass it over to our tech support, James, to maybe cue up some outro music or a closing slide, and then we'll end the Facebook Live. Take care.